Thank you for listening to this message from Northwest Hills Community Church in Corvallis, Oregon. You can learn more about our church at nwhills.com. Today, lead pastor Josh Carstensen starts a new vision series. We often hear the word Christian, but what does that truly mean? Like many words, it carries different connotations, often shaped by culture, history, or misconceptions. And the world may have redefined this term, but what did Jesus say? To be a Christian starts with one profound truth: loving Him more than anything else. Let's explore what that looks like. Also, to conclude our Something to Say series, we'll start the message with a montage of all the testimonies from the previous year. We hope you find it encouraging. Now, here are those stories.
My name is Quentin Arthur Hawes.
My name is James Cleary.
My name is Rebecca Hathaway.
Melissa Whiteman.
Pavel. Keith Lampy.
Elissa Autry.
Ellis Wilson. I've been at Northwest Hills for about 5 months.
20 years.
A year and a half.
15 years.
About a year.
30 years.
My name is Martha Wagner.
Jim King.
Jill Childress.
Nick Viscomi.
Kayla Crow.
Io Papula, and I've been coming to Northwest Hills for 6 months, 2 years.
5 years.
16 years.
25 years.
35 years. My name is Steve Binney, and I've been at Northwest Hills almost 51 years.
For me, following Jesus has changed everything.
There's a lot of different ways that following Jesus has changed my life.
Following Christ has made all the difference in life.
Growing up, I did not understand who God was. I was raised Roman Catholic, but I never really felt like I was at home there.
I grew up in a loving home, but it wasn't a Christian home.
I was born and raised in the communist Czechoslovakia.
I'm from India, from a different faith, and I grew up without a father.
They taught us at school that religion is for weak old people.
I was raised in a good home. We didn't do a lot with church.
My parents adopted me at birth from a birth mother who made it clear that I was a mistake and she did not want me. I struggled until early adulthood with the pain of my birth mother's rejection of me and her abandonment of me.
I wanted to live my life for me.
I was chasing things that we thought that we needed and we wanted in this world.
I got arrested, went to jail.
I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa.
We were constantly subject to physical and mental abuse.
And I struggled my entire life up until young adulthood with this pain.
And Satan took that and drove it into my heart as a lie. See, you were made wrong.
And so I was going to fix it myself, and that didn't work out so good.
I searched for value and wholeness in places where it was not to be found.
Which showed me that living for the world and living for myself gets me nowhere but depression, anxiety, sadness, not knowing who I am, not knowing where my life is going to end up.
It was a darkness that was starting to consume me.
I felt like my whole world was falling apart.
And I remember thinking, I don't know how we're doing this.
And I was just asking God, why me?
I shed quite a few tears.
I was really not sure if I'd ever feel joy again. And
somewhere in the midst of that, I met 2 Christian girls from Crew.
I had some good friends that invited me to a Young Life camp.
I was sitting there in church one day,
and I started to pray.
We need to pray about this.
I remember praying and just saying, God, what are you doing?
Jesus, help me. I didn't know what else to say.
Jesus, if you are real, I give all of that I'm going through, I just give it to you.
And God drew me back to Himself.
I felt like He was meeting me right where I was in that moment. I just started bawling.
Hearing God actually say to me, I love you, and I love you right where you're at.
I'm with you and I care about you.
Trust me, trust me.
Be patient. God took those initial circumstances and created this pathway of look what good I can do.
And at that moment, I knew it was from God.
I'm very thankful that the Lord put someone in my life that could just tell me how it is.
God can use anybody.
The words that you speak to people, you never know where they're going to go.
They said something very profound that I will never forget. They said, we will walk with you.
That's how we ultimately fulfill this mission of love Jesus, live like Jesus, make Him known.
I don't know where I would have been if somebody hadn't asked me to come to church.
And I know we're all at a different point in our journey with Christ, but overall, I think it's most important to start knowing that you are loved.
God really does care about us.
There's nothing I can do
to make Jesus love me more, but there's also nothing I can do to make him love me less.
God has kept me in his grace and protected me.
Jesus is my comfort.
He is an awesome God.
Gives us exactly what we need.
He's just been so faithful. He is my Savior.
He restores, he sustains.
He pursues us, and he wants a relationship with us.
Take heart that God is in control.
We can trust God.
The one thing that is better than anything else.
And that's the only thing I have. I have faith in him. I have nothing else. I must truly be a beggar because I have nothing else. And I must be the richest man alive because I don't need anything else. And at the end, Jesus was worth it all.
Good morning. My name is Josh Carstensen. I'm the lead pastor around here. I got a question for you. Have you ever been asked the question, especially recently, are you a Christian? How about the question, are you an evangelical? Those are loaded questions, yeah? Yeah, I get asked that occasionally, and I don't get to hide like a lot of you guys get to do for a little while, because when I meet people for the first time, typically the question is always like, oh, well, what do you do? And there's two things we all know that we don't talk about, right? We don't talk about religion and politics. And I get to just start off with the fun first one, right? Because I'm like, not only am I a Christian, but I'm like that super weird, like really bought into it, like you're a pastor Christian, which is really weird. Like, you think it's funny till you sit in my shoes meeting people for the first time, and you're like, well, certainly your wife does something, right? Like, oh, she's really bought into the church thing too. Like, it's like it's like really, really real. And man, we have a lot of different ideas and experiences around the word, right? What does it mean to be a Christian? And we have a lot of different reactions to the word. I was on a plane a couple months ago. My wife was sitting in the row in front of me. It was in 3 seats, and it was me, and there was a younger gal, mid-20s. She was a flight stewardess, and super fun, excited to travel the world type of young person. And then we had a gentleman to my right who was probably in his mid-50s. He was an employee at Caltech, working on the Mars rover in jet propulsion. And we're having this really fun conversation between both of them. We're probably 20, 30 minutes into this conversation where we're like pulling out our phones and showing each other pictures of different travel, and everyone's laughing and having a good time. And then comes like my least favorite question in that moment. What do you do? And I'm like, oh, I'm a pastor. And my lovely girl to the left of me, she looks at me like I'm a ghost, first of all, like just like absolutely mortified. Immediately grabs a pair of earbuds, throws them in her ears, and turns the other way, like straight up. And I'm a pretty confident person. I'm like, where my mind's going is like, oh, you poor girl, this has been a rough road. Like, I don't know where you've come from, but man, that hurt you. The guy on my right, he's geeking out like a gamer with a new console. He's just like, I've been to seminary. I have 1,000 questions for you. Like what? Like dispensationalism, covenant theology. Are we going predestination? What's your take on Augustine and like in church history? Is he like, and just like, you're talking some of the deepest questions. My wife was sitting in front of me hearing all this. I don't know what was going on in your head. Eventually the girl came around and we had a great time. But I tell you what, when you think of the word Christian, we all have different experiences. We all, in some ways, might even have different definitions, right? What does it mean to be a Christian? Words are tricky like that, right? Words trigger things in us. We have different thoughts of what things mean, and it's true of a lot of words. You think of the word fishing, right? When some of you think of fishing, you have like great, happy, fun memories. Fishing can mean, I'm going to go 15 minutes in my backyard, or it can mean I'm going to go 5 hours out in the ocean. It can mean a lot of different things, but we have a lot of different experiences with that. In my home, I love fishing. I think it's a ton of fun. A couple weeks ago, I was out fishing with some friends, caught some things we'd never caught before. True story, there's witnesses in this room. I caught a rock. I've never caught a rock before. It had a tiny hole in it. I pulled it in, caught a rock. My friend, who may or may not be sitting right back there, caught a pair of leopard print women's underwear. True story. True story. Off the bottom of the Santiam River. You never know. It's Oregon. Our friend Gary, and Gary asked for some intercession about this. He caught nothing. And Gary Jones, our youth pastor, he's been catching nothing for a while. So if you want to start some prayer circles, if you want to lift him up on Tuesdays and Thursdays, that would be awesome. He's hurting. I love fishing. My wife, she grew up in a home with a dad who was really into fishing, probably more than into the experience of taking a young girl fishing. So when she thinks of fishing, she thinks of like 7 hours, freezing cold, miserable. Like she never wants to go with me when I want to go fishing. And bless her heart, like, yeah. When I think of the word shopping, last week, I was with my family, my brother-in-law's here, and he and I went on a 20-mile bike ride in the morning on Monday. And we get a call from my family saying, hey, let's meet downtown and let's go shopping together. And I love my family, and let's do it. My mom's the queen shopper. She's right here. And so we meet up in the Inkwell, right, downtown Inkwell. 5 minutes into this, I am just absolutely exhausted. Like, and it has nothing to do with the bike ride. Like 5 minutes into any shopping, I don't know what it is, I'm gassed. Like, I could do a Murph and be less tired than 5 minutes of shopping. Like, that is a true story. My wife, on the other hand, like the ultra marathoner when it comes to strength and love for the sport that is shopping. We were in another country this last year, and we were in a place that was crazy crowded. Like, I'm talking crazy, crazy crowded. And another friend of mine is here, too. She was here. Anyways, Jessie. Yes, right here. And we split up, husband and wives, because we were there with some friends. And we went shopping with each other. And we were an hour and a half in. And we'd been to like 20 different stores. And I'm just telling Megan, man, that was some really good shopping. And she goes, oh, we haven't even started shopping. She's like, I was just gathering information. I haven't bought anything yet. Man, when we think about words like fishing or shopping, or more significant words, right, like Christian or evangelical or faith, there's a lot of things that comes to mind. And the truth is, sometimes there's some pretty messy definitions out there. You think about all the different definitions that are out there for different words, and there's a lot of them. Right? This year, what we're going to do with our theme is we're going to look at a lot of different words. And we're going to ask, what did God mean when he said things like justice? What did God mean when he said a word like love? What did God mean when he said a word like peace or war or sexuality or male, female, masculine, feminine? What did he mean when he used words like government or fear, or shame, or joy, or hope? Because our world has given a lot of definitions to these words, right? And with this little phrase over there, have you heard? We're going to get after, have you heard a definition that is a little bit different than how God intended it for, right? We're hearing a script right now that's out there that says, hey, if you call yourself a Christian, it means this. You know, if you call yourself a Christian, perhaps it means you are a political conservative. Perhaps it means that you are unscientific or anti-intellectual, or you're holier than thou, right? If you call yourself a Christian, maybe you're kind of anti-war or pro-war, or you're naive, or you're sheltered, or you're a climate change denier. You know, if you call yourself a Christian and you're a dude, you're absolutely like just really in touch with your feelings, and you want to cry with other men all the time. If you call yourself a Christian, you're a beta male who loves cats. Like, that's a thing. I tell you what. I never thought I would publicly admit this, but we got some kittens a couple weeks ago. I'm trying to control my gopher population, so we got some kittens. And for the first time in my life, last week, I saw a dead cat on the side of the road, and I had a heart of compassion. Like, For a nanosecond, I said, someone is missing that. We'll get to the Bible, I promise. If you're a Christian woman, you're a wife, does it mean that you're just like Little House on the Prairie, what is it, trad wife, long sleeves, like butter churning, always, yes, honey, whatever you want? Is that what that means? Right? There's a lot of words that come with a lot of what the world says is true. And this year, we're going to talk about flipping the script, meaning we're going to take what the world says and we're going to get after the real meaning. What did God mean when he brought life or joy or peace or relationship? What did God mean by that? And so we are going to intentionally, and here's where our catchphrase comes from, we are going to intentionally script the flip, meaning we are on purpose going to talk about what it means to have a right definition and a right understanding of how God created the world. We're going to do this through a couple of different ways. We're going to do this primarily through the Sermon on the Mount. Right? This is Jesus' most famous sermon, so we're going to study this for about 10 months, where week by week, we're going to go line by line through the whole thing, where over and over, we're going to hear Jesus say, you have heard it said, but what? But I say to you. Right? You've heard it said, like this is how you should live. You've heard that it's said, this is what you should think. But I say to you. Week after week, we're going to get after that. And then towards the end of the year, we're going to go in the book of Ecclesiastes where King Solomon is going to say, hey, you've heard it said that if your life looks like this, you're going to finally get what you want. Right? If you can get all the women that you want, then you will be happy. If you can get all the land and all the houses and all the power and all the authority, then you will finally be happy. And we're going to see what happens to someone who actually got everything that the world promised, that have you heard? Have you heard if you get this, you're going to be like this? We're going to see someone who got it all and in the end did not get what that was promised. So going through the Sermon on the Mount, going through Ecclesiastes this year, we are going to script the flip on purpose. We are going to change and bring back God's heart for these words that really, really matter. To kick it all off, we're going to start over today in the next few days with trying to answer that question that we started with, and that is, what is a Christian? It's a fundamental question. It's an important question, particularly in the church, because I think it can be easy to have different definitions. Well, what do you mean by Christian? Right? What is that? Maybe you've been coming to church for a few years and you're like, I think I know what it means to be a Christian. Well, Jesus is going to tell us very specifically that there are certain things that to be a Christian you have to do. He's going to make this very, very clear. And so we're going to look at this whole idea of what it means to be a Christian. To start out, we're going to be in the book of Acts. So if you go Acts 11, we're going to hear about this phrase for the first time. Because guess what? Jesus never used the term Christian. He never used it. It was used about 10 or 15 years after Jesus left. And we're going to talk about what does it mean to be a Christian. In Acts chapter 11, verse 26, I don't have it up here. I got some other verses up here, but if you want to read that, this is where we see this phrase for the very first time. This is Acts 11, verse 26. And in Antioch, the disciples were first called Christians. Initially, the word Christian was a derogatory term, most people believe. It was used not by Christians. It was used by people who were anti-Christian to label and caricature Christians, primarily in the Hebrew world. Those who rejected Jesus as Messiah, they said, these people who are accepting you as Messiah, these people are going to be Christians, and we're going to label them that so that we have a term to give to them. So again, at first, it was not necessarily a friendly word. It was more of a derogatory term. It comes from the word, or it comes from the idea, and you see this starting right there. It's in verse 26. In Antioch, the disciples were first called Christians. So the first Christian wasn't called a Christian. They were called disciples. We see that phrase all throughout the New Testament in the Gospels. Jesus regularly is going to call people who follow him his disciples. And that was just a way of living back then. Back then, you didn't have kind of the formal education that we have today. You had people who would follow specific leaders, whether that was in trade or whether that was in finance or whether it was in religion. People followed someone. They took all their teachings and then they adopted them into their life. And they considered themselves disciples of said teacher. Well, Jesus was a leader who people followed, and the people who followed him were called his disciples. And so if you call yourself a Christian, you first have to ask, am I a disciple? Am I a follower of Jesus? And here's what's fascinating about the Bible, and I mentioned this earlier, I'm going to say it again. There's a few places in the New Testament where Jesus makes it very clear. If you want to be a follower of mine, this must be true about you. And if this is not true about you, you cannot be a disciple of mine. For those of us who like checking off boxes and making lists, I think it's actually pretty helpful. Because if we're going to ask ourselves, am I a follower of Jesus? Jesus is going to make it very clear over the next few weeks. This is what it means to be a follower of me. Again, I think there's a lot of confusion in the world about what being a Christian is. And so we're trying to boil it all down to the basics. What did Jesus actually say about what being a follower of his necessitates? And if we don't do these things, Jesus says we are not his disciples. We're going to look at two of these today, and we're going to build on this for the next few weeks. But today he's going to make two claims, and they're somewhat interrelated. The first claim is this: if we are going to be a Christian, we have to love God above everything else. And the second claim, it builds on it. If we are going to call ourselves Christians, if we are going to be a disciple, we have to love God even more than we love ourselves. If we do not do these things, Jesus says, you cannot be my disciples. If you got a Bible, let's go Matthew 10. We're going to jump right in where Jesus is going to make this very, very clear. To love me, to call yourself a follower of me, to call yourself a Christian, this must be true. And he starts out, and it's pretty intense. So hang with me. I'm going to try to give some context and make sense of it, but Jesus doesn't mince his words here. Matthew 10, if you would, and you're able, would you stand with me? We're going to open up God's word here, starting in verse 34. I'm reading from the English Standard Version, so if you got a digital Bible, that's the ESV. It should be on the screen here too. Here we go. This is Matthew 10, starting in verse 34. I'm going to read through 37. When I'm done, I'm going to say, this is the word of the Lord, and you can say, thanks be to God. These are the words of Jesus. He says, do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You can grab a seat. Now, like I said, this feels harsh. And it feels somewhat inconsistent if you know your Bible. Especially you think about the kind of what we call the top 10, the 10 commandments from the Old Testament in Exodus 20. The fifth one, God reveals that we're supposed to honor our father and our mother. So what does Jesus mean here when he says that I did not come to bring peace, but I came to bring a sword? Verse 37 is key here. He says, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. In other words, you cannot call yourself a Christian. You cannot call yourself a disciple if you love these more than me. Now, let me give you some context. Jesus is preparing his close followers to go into northern Galilee to tell people that he is the Messiah. He's telling the people who have a context for what that means. He's telling the Hebrew world at this point that you guys have been waiting for someone to come for a long time. This person is Jesus. And people are going to receive that news very differently. Some people will accept you. They will accept the things that you're saying. They will accept that this is true. And some people will reject it. And he says those some people will happen in family units. In family units, some people are going to accept this and some people are going to reject it. In order to give them a context for that, he quotes a verse from Micah. So his sword analogy, his mother against daughter, father against son, that is a direct quote from the book of Micah, chapter 7, verse 6, where in that world, Micah was a prophet. He was speaking to a nation that had wholeheartedly rejected God. And he's speaking as this prophet, and he's saying, hey, if you do not repent, God is going to bring judgment to this nation, to this city. You're going to be decimated, right? And some of the people repented, and they said, I believe these words. I believe that this is from God. And some people said, absolutely not. This is not going to happen. We are God's chosen people. He would never do this for us, right? Yah Israel. And that happened, that breakdown happened within homes. Some family members believed it. Some family members rejected it. Jesus is saying, hey, are you going to accept these words of mine that are true, or are you going to reject them? Where is your allegiance? For him, in this context, when he's talking about family, he recognizes that people are going to have to make a decision when it comes to our faith. And it's going to go against some of our families. And some of us, man, we feel this more than others. Right? But all of us, if we call ourselves a Christian, we feel this to some degree. Being a Christian divides families. Sometimes it's explicit, and sometimes it's implicit, right? Sometimes it's more overt, and sometimes it's more subtle, right? Starting with the subtle observation. If you're a follower of Jesus and there's people in your family who aren't, whether that's your immediate family or your kind of extended family, there are different worldviews that are at play here. And ultimately, if you're not a follower of Jesus and you're looking at a family who is, you're looking at a family who says, the way you're living is wrong. Right? If you really boil it down to, you're looking at a family that says, ultimately, we're going to spend eternity forever from one another. We have different values. We have different worldviews. Even if you have a great relationship, like, that's painful. That's hard. Right? That's a hard thing to reconcile. Most of us know that feeling, at least subtly. Some of us know it very overtly. You think about the tension that comes in families when it comes to some people believing in Jesus and some people not. Right? This happens in all kinds of different ways. We see it all the time. We saw a few videos, a few stories about this last year. Right? Sometimes it happens where someone was raised in a home that was not a follower of that weren't followers of Jesus, and they decide, hey, I'm going to become a follower of Jesus. Right? And maybe this happens between a husband and wife, and now you're trying to figure out, how do I do this on my own? Right? I'm in this marriage, and I'm trying to be faithful to my marriage, but I'm trying to follow Jesus. That there's going to be some pain in that. Right? There's going to be some loneliness of you're coming to church by yourself. You're waking up Sunday. You're getting out the car by yourself. You're going to a small group where everyone else has their nice little families, and you're by yourself. Right? Or your spouse forbids you. That's hard. There's some real pain in that. Right? Or maybe you're a kid, and this happens here at youth group. I've heard this story. You're a kid who grows up in a home that does not love Jesus, and your parents are telling you you're not allowed to go there. Right? You're not allowed to hang out with those people. Right? How do you do that as a kid? You're like, I'm 14 years old. I have classmates who are Christians. I love what they're saying. I want to know more, but my mom and dad aren't letting me. Right? That's some pain as a kid. Right? It happens in other countries in very overt ways. I have met people and I have talked to people, like not just read in books, but I've talked to people who are like, I haven't been able to talk to my family for years because if they found me, they would want to kill me. Right? To keep the honor of the family, I have walked away from this faith that I had. I'm now a follower of Jesus, which means I had to say goodbye to everything. Like, that's real. That happens today. I mean, we can open up our Bible in this context and we can say like, oh, that's kind of harsh. There's people around the world who are opening up their Bibles going, yep, I know what that feels like. Right? And then another very real pain that some of us feel. Maybe your mom and dad and you're raising kids. And man, if you got young kids, yes and amen. It's kind of the sweet spot. They love coming to Sunday school, hopefully. But then what happens when kids get a little bit older? Sometimes kids say, nope, not for me. Right? And that's a real pain. Right? Some of us know this. And what do? I see families go one of two directions. Right? I see some families, they're like, hey, we're holding on to our faith. We're going strong. It's a painful relationship, but I'm going to maintain a steady faithfulness to what I know God's asking me to do. But I also see some families who go, you know what? In order to try to show my kids support, I'm going to pull back from my faith. Maybe I'm not going to engage on Sundays as much. Maybe I'm going to do Like, it's not going to be as overt, and I would still secretly call myself a Christian, but I'm going to try to appease my kids. Well, I'll tell you what, I've never seen that situation. I've never seen the kid go, oh, great, my parents pulled away from something that they said was so important. Maybe that should be really important in my life. Never seen that happen. Never seen it. At the end of the day, though, it is crazy painful when in a family we make a choice. Am I going to follow Jesus when other people that I love dearly have made choices not to? It's happened in my own family, my extended family. I mean, a lot of us know what we're talking about here. So Jesus makes this clear. And why does he use the family in it? To them, it was everything, right? It's your past, it's your present, it's your future, it's your security, it's everything. Family unit was everything back then, right? For us, families are really important, but we can also get away with kind of living on our own, doing our own thing. But the greater question is, do I love God more than anything else? Right? And there's a lot of everything else's. Right? Do I love God more than my career or my friends or my hobbies, or you fill in whatever the thing that you're chasing, my desires, right? Do I love God more than anything? As we're thinking about what it means to be a follower of Jesus, am I asking myself the question, what are the things that are trying to steal my love for God, that I'm tempted to chase this thing rather than to chase the Lord? And he builds on it in the second point, and it's similar, but I think it's a little bit different, that we need to love God not only more than anything, but we need to love him more than we love ourselves. Let's go Luke 14, starting in verse 25. Luke 14, similar language. You're going to hear it. It's going to sound similar, but then he adds to this. He says, now great crowds accompanied him and turned and said to them, this is Jesus speaking now in verse 26, if anyone comes to me and he does not hate his own father and mother, he's just using exaggerated language here, and wife and children and brothers and sisters, and then he adds to this right here, and yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. There it is. It's super clear. You cannot be my disciple if you do not reject your own life. Well, what does it mean by that? What is rejecting of your own life? It means at the bottom of the heart, like saying, my life is not just mine. Like, my life exists to manage what God wants me to manage, right? So that's my time, right? That's the things he's entrusted me with. That's my relationships. Like, am I asking God, how can I have a heart after you? Because we have like in our minds, like we have affections that are torn because we want our wants, but God's saying, I want you to want my wants. I heard a pastor say this. I think it's a helpful little analogy. He said, I love doing weddings. And he says, I often will do this at a wedding. He's up front with the groom, and the whole bridal party's come down, and everyone's hanging out, they're having a good time, and here comes the bride. She's cruising in. Everyone's standing, looking at the bride, and he will turn over and he will whisper to the groom, wouldn't it be awesome if Jesus came back right now? That is such a mean thing to say. And you can feel the tension in that, right? Because if you're the groom, you're going like, I guess, but man, it'd be really nice to like get to the honeymoon, right? Like to enjoy the wedding, to enjoy the next week. God, if you could come back in like 4 or 5 days, that would be awesome. You know, if we're honest, most of us would have that reaction. A few of us would be like, God, yes and amen. Like, if that's what you want, I'm right there. Right? But if it's not that aisle moment, we all have different things. Like, substitute that for, God, oh man, if I can just have this experience, if you just find me a spouse, God, if you just give me this career opportunity, God, if you would just give me this feeling of satisfaction, I'm so close. I think I'm right there. Right? Or whatever it is. Rather than what God might be asking of us. Right? Well, our question is, what's God asking of us? Right? Because that's the $1 million question. What does God want from us? What does he want us to do? Right? Because what does it actually mean to love him? Like, how does that play itself out? Right? How do I practically do this? How do I want his wants? How is my life? How is my stuff? How is my time not actually mine but his? Right? I think it starts with just asking the question, God, today is yours. God, today is yours. I'm going to try to do what I can to be faithful to what you want me to do. And you're going to have to make it clear, what do you want me to do? But we need to do our job and ask the question, God, what do you want me to do? If we're to call ourselves Christians, it starts with a love for God. I want to end with this idea and this thought. How do we do that, though? Because it's not just a switch that we can flip. I'm just going to love God more than anything. Like, we can't just sit here and listen to a sermon and say, okay, yep, that's it. I'm just going to choose with everything in me to just love God no matter what, more than myself, more than my wife walking down the aisle. I'm going to just make that choice. Right? How do we do that? I think the only way that we can do that is by knowing that we are loved more than anything else. We got to start there. You will not chase God with everything that you have until you realize that God's chased you with everything that he has. Right? I heard this story a number of years ago as a kid. I heard it in a sermon. And the story, as I heard it, I thought it was real. And it was a story that went like this. There was a kid who grew up in Central Valley, California, in a very wealthy farming home. But as a kid, always was in conflict with his parents. So his goal, once he was 18, he was going to leave. And he told his dad this, hey, Dad, I'm leaving. When I'm 18, I'm out of here. Goodbye. And when he turned 18, he left. He went to the East Coast, about a decade of life, zero communication with his parents. Cell phones were not a thing back then. Email was not a thing. The son did not call. No communication. After chasing a life that ended in absolute ruin, some of his friends were like, hey, you need to go back home. He's like, I don't have a home. I would not be accepted at home. I have no way of reconciling what I did to my parents. But they convinced him, no, you need to give it a shot. And so they put him on a train to go back home. And the stop before his stop, he got off. He's like, I cannot do this. I can't go home. I'm not going to be loved. I'm not going to be accepted. It's not possible. I've hurt my parents too much. So he's sitting there, and he's at the train station, the one before his stop, and someone ends up talking to him, and he hears his story. He's like, hey, I'm trying to go home, but I don't think that I'm going to be loved. I don't know. And he says, but hey, and the guy convinces him, why don't you just give it a shot? Just give it a shot. Why don't you just try to go home? And he tells him, he says, I'm going to go, and I'm going to talk to your dad. And if he's willing to accept you back, I want him to hang a white sheet on one of the trees in the orchard when you pass by, because you pass the orchard before you get off on the stop. And so he hears this, he goes, I guess I'll give it a shot. And so he gets on the train the next day. His dad knows he's coming. And he's on the train. He's like, I can't look. I don't want to see. I don't want to feel the pain of rejection when I go by and there's nothing there. And so he's on this train, and he's sitting down. He's got his eyes closed, and someone comes up to him and says, hey, you okay? He's like, hey. He explains to him the situation. He says, if you see anything, would you just come and get me? Would you just show me that my dad sees me? And he says, hey, I'm welcoming home. And so he's going by, and the guy, he grabs him and says, hey, you got to come see this. And for something like 5 or 10 square miles, there's a sheet hung on every single tree. And it's like an almond orchard on every tree. And I heard that story as a kid. I thought, man, that was crazy powerful. I looked it up as an adult, and I think it's not a true story. And there's a lot of stories like that. Right? Actually, after first service, someone came and told me that there's a song after this. The guy in prison, he wrote to his dad coming out of prison, hey, would you hang a yellow thing on the oak tree when I get out of prison if you accept me? And I've read that there's other stories of, well, maybe it was the train, and there was like, a clothesline, and instead of just hanging one thing on the clothesline, Dad covered the whole barn. But what if the story was actually true? Right? What if Christianity really is true? What if we really are loved that much? Right? What if it's really true that your dad and your mom took the effort to hang a sheet on hundreds of thousands of trees at the chance of telling you, hey, you're welcome back. I love you with everything that I have. Right? What if that was true? Right? So when we look at this cross, which is why it's going to be up here as long as I'm around, that cross is a reminder that God's going to do anything and everything to get your attention and say, hey, I love you. I paid for your sin, It does not matter what you've done in life. It does not matter how far from me you have run. I love you with a never, ever stopping, undying love. Paid for it all. If that's true, man, wouldn't we want to love God in return? Right? If we have a dad like that, wouldn't we feel welcomed home? Wouldn't we want to give him everything that we have, knowing that he has everything and he will give it all back to us? We're going to close, and I want us to think about a few things here. But would you just bow your head and pray with me? God, there's a really good question that we are trying to answer, and that is, what does it mean to be a Christian? And Jesus is going to make it very clear. To be a Christian is to love you more than anything. And God, it's my hope and my heart that we would want to do that. Some of us in here this week, we are receiving this, and we have loved you, and we are trying to love you with everything that we have. Man, if that's us in this room, I pray that we would be diligent in this season, diligent in the next couple days, in the next couple weeks, to simply come before you and say, God, what are your desires for my life, and how can I follow you? Now, what does that look like this week? What does it look like in my office? What does it look like in my close relationships? How can I be obedient, and how can I want the things that you want more than the things that I want? Lord, for those of us in this room who have never really felt loved, God, whether that's by family, whether that's by friends, and most importantly, whether it's by you, God, somehow would you show us that when you died on that cross, God, that we would recognize that that came for the ultimate cost for you, showing that you love us no matter what, that you gave everything for us, and that maybe we'd give it a shot to come back or to seek you or to follow you. God, for those of us in this room who have walked through seasons of that family hurt that Jesus alludes to, God, you promise that no matter that hurt, we're going to receive tenfold the love. Maybe here, maybe in the future. I pray that we'd hold on to a love for you above anything else. We love you, Jesus. I pray all this in your name. Amen. I love you guys.
Thanks for listening to today's teaching from Northwest Hills Community Church. We hope you find ways to apply the gospel to your life. And be sure to check out our website, nwhills.com, where you'll find ways to engage with us. And if you're able, we'd love to see you at church next Sunday. Thanks again for listening.